We wade today into deep waters, friends. The figure of Jesus of Nazareth, a man shrouded in mystery and revered for his purported divinity, presents us with a profound paradox. His teachings, central to one of the world's largest religions, are rife with what appear to be stark contradictions. Our intent here is not to engage in cheap attacks on faith, but rather to grapple honestly with these challenging passages. Whether you approach this as a devout believer or a hardened skeptic, understanding these contradictions is essential. It is in the crucible of such intellectual wrestling that our assumptions are challenged, our perspectives refined, and our understanding of this pivotal figure deepened. In John 14:12, Jesus assures his followers they shall perform even greater miracles. Yet how do we reconcile this with the lived reality of most believers? Ask and you shall receive, proclaims John 14:13-14. But what of the countless pleas whispered to the heavens, met with only silence? The resurrection timeline, lost in translation, Matthew 40 states, Jesus would be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights, yet the resurrection account suggests otherwise. How do we reconcile this discrepancy? Jesus foretells Peter's 3 denials in John 13:38. Did this demonstrate divine foresight, or is there a more prosaic explanation? In Mark 10:19, Jesus cites the 10 Commandments, yet omits a key one and alters another. Was this an intentional deviation or an oversight? John 3:13 presents a conundrum. No one has ascended to heaven but he who came down from heaven, that is the Son of Man who is in heaven. How can this be reconciled? Jesus promises the thief on the cross a place in paradise. Does this contradict traditional views of judgment and the afterlife? Old Testament teachings, love your enemies, that's not what they taught. Matthew 5:43 instructs us to love our enemies, a stark contrast to certain Old Testament teachings. How do we reconcile these seemingly opposing views? The kingdom of God, here and now, are yet to come. Luke 16:16 proclaims the kingdom of God is at hand. Yet millennia later, its full realization seems elusive. What are we to make of this? Matthew 12:5 seems to contradict traditional interpretations of Sabbath observance. Did Jesus intend to abolish the law? In Matthew 21:16, Jesus quotes a psalm, yet the wording differs from the original text. What are the implications of this discrepancy? Mark 9:13 presents an interpretation of Elijah's prophecy that seems to contradict the traditional understanding. How do we make sense of this? Divine or not divine? That is the question. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus' divine status is presented inconsistently. Is he God, man, or both? And how can these seemingly contradictory claims be reconciled? The fool conundrum. Jesus condemns anger and insults, calling someone a fool in Matthew 5:22. Is this hypocritical, or is there perhaps a deeper meaning? Or not? The duality of peace and violence. Jesus preaches peace, yet also speaks of bringing a sword. How do we reconcile these seemingly contradictory teachings? Jesus' mission seems to shift between focusing on Israel and embracing all nations. How do we understand this apparent contradiction? Luke 14:26 features the shocking statement about hating one's family. Is this meant literally, or is there a deeper metaphorical meaning? Matthew 10:34 seems to contradict Jesus' message of peace. Is this a call to violence, or is there another interpretation? Untangling the contradictions. Jesus' teachings on divorce appear to differ throughout the Gospels. How do we reconcile these inconsistencies? The Gospel anachronism, a slip of the tongue, or divine revelation. Mark 8:35 mentions the Gospel before it was established. Is this an anachronism, or is there another explanation? Temptation. Resist or don't. Navigating the contradictions. Jesus' teachings on temptation appear contradictory. Are we to resist all temptation, or is there a place for testing? When rules collide with compassion, Jesus is accused of breaking the Sabbath. Was he challenging the law or demonstrating a higher purpose? To judge or not to judge, the paradox of condemnation. John 3:17 states, God did not send his Son to condemn the world, yet other passages suggest judgment. How do these claims coexist? Unanswered prayers, whose fault is it anyway? James 4:3 suggests unanswered prayers are due to our own failings. Does this place blame on the faithful rather than acknowledging divine limitations? Jesus' own testimony about himself presents inconsistencies. How do we weigh the reliability of his claims? Jesus promises his presence, yet also speaks of his departure. How do we reconcile these seemingly conflicting statements? The rules regarding divorce appear to vary across the Gospels. Is this a matter of interpretation, cultural context, or something else entirely? Judge not, lest ye be judged. Or should we? Jesus warns against judging others, yet also passes judgment himself. How do we interpret this seeming contradiction? To die or not to die, unraveling the contradictions. Jesus expresses both a willingness and a reluctance to die. How do we understand this seeming inconsistency in his approach to death? Hosea misquoted, a lapse in memory or deliberate change. Luke 23:30 quotes Hosea yet alters the original text. What is the significance of this discrepancy? The portrayal of John the Baptist's role appears inconsistent. Was he a true prophet or a figure misunderstood? The Gospels seem to present conflicting views on salvation through faith versus works. How do we reconcile these seemingly opposing views? Jesus avoids death at times, yet ultimately embraces it. How do we understand his inconsistent approach to his own mortality? Jesus suggests even thoughts can be sinful. Now, does this equate thought with action, and what precisely are the implications for personal morality? Despite advocating for loving one's enemies, Jesus sometimes displays anger and judgment. How then do we reconcile these seemingly contradictory behaviors? Jesus performs miracles, yet also refuses to provide signs to skeptics. Is this a contradiction, or is there perhaps a deeper principle at play? Jesus' post-resurrection commands appear contradictory. How do we reconcile these inconsistencies and determine the true message? Jesus is attributed with divine power, yet also expresses limitations. How do we reconcile these seemingly contradictory attributes? Jesus claims to bring peace, yet acknowledges his message will cause division. How do we understand this paradoxical outcome? Jesus criticizes those who demand signs while also emphasizing the importance of testimony. How do we reconcile these seemingly contradictory views on evidence? Jesus speaks of laying down his life for his friends, yet his sacrifice ultimately extends to all. How do we understand this seeming contradiction in his actions? Jesus' unconventional birth and upbringing raise questions about his legitimacy as a religious leader according to traditional standards. How do we reconcile this with his claims and teachings? So what are we to make of these contradictions? Do they unravel the very fabric of faith, or do they point to a deeper, more paradoxical truth? Perhaps in our quest for easy answers, we've missed the point entirely. Maybe these inconsistencies aren't meant to be resolved but wrestled with. Perhaps they're invitations to move beyond the limitations of literal interpretations and embrace the messy, complex, and often contradictory nature of faith, existence, and the human condition itself.